I am not going to turn down an opportunity to ride in a fuel-injected V8 shopping cart that's like 20 feet long and 10 or 12 feet high.
Fast and Loud featured some pretty iconic motor masterminds, and they looked for timeless cars and bikes from across the country to spin. The show's stars used to find worn-out cars that people no longer used, and then they would work their magic and turn it into something that they can not only sell, but also get a lot of profit from it. This was a super interesting concept, and not a lot of people were into this niche back then, so it also had a lot of potential. People instantly hit it off with the show, and soon enough, it became a staple for motor pros and novices alike. However, before anyone knew, Fast and Loud disappeared from the spotlight. No one understood what really happened, and that's why we'll be discovering the rise and fall of Fast and Loud.
Some other things, some other cats I want to skin, some other things I want to get into.
Well, I mean, what does extended vacation mean?
To quote Stevie Nicks, I think I have to go my own way.
My vacation from Gas Monkey is going to be a permanent one.
Fast and Loud has been one of the best reality shows in TV history, and it was mostly because Richard Rawlings hosted it in the best way possible. Richard is an entrepreneur and a TV personality who is best known for taking Fast and Loud to its peak, but things weren't always ideal for him. He started his journey from Fort Worth, Texas, where he used to repair cars with his father, and this is where his passion for cars actually started. He even bought his very first car only at the age of 14, which is a huge leap forward. He even graduated high school and went for a whole different career in printing press. But in 2002, he sold his printing company to open his very own Gas Monkey garage in Dallas. This was the one-stop shop for everything related to classic and chic cars. His business got so famous that it caught the attention of the Discovery Channel, and his career took off from this point forward. His car collection is also very impressive, containing multiple Pontiacs and even a rare 1968 Shelby Mustang. He also spent a 1970 Dodge Challenger and a classic 1977 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. And all of these cars are customized by Rawlings himself, so we really can't deny his talent for upscaling literally anything. It's the reason why he was an instant hit on Fast and Loud. So far, Rawlings has sold about 28 pieces of his spin cars, and it has garnered him over $10 million, so the garage is gonna do pretty well even without the show. But the show made him who he is, and because of his hosting, he got to spin some of the most expensive cars. Rawlings' hosting was so well received from the audiences that the creators made him a co-host of another one of Discovery's shows too. His garage sales skyrocketed since the show, and he has even officially sponsored Peter Hickman for the FHO race, which is kind of a big deal.
Really like to drive this truck and have some beer this evening.
Well, then technically ask these two if they'll start it for you.
Let's start it up, fools.
Are y'all ready? Let's do it.
Come on!
Fast and Loud wasn't really a recipe for disaster in the beginning. In fact, the show had a pretty good run. When Discovery's producers saw how Rawlings was spinning cars in his small garage and how people on social media were actually pretty interested in it, they thought that this could be a cool reality show. Although Rawlings' shop wasn't getting him a lot of profit back then, but his craft was close to perfection. So the producers talked to him about wanting to host his own automobile spinning show, and he obviously said yes. It was like a dream come true for him because he always wanted to find the most classic cars and turn them into priceless vehicles. This way, he was actually getting paid good money for it and was a free promotion for his garage. Who would decline this kind of an offer? So he accepted and decided to go for it. At first, Rawlings wasn't even sure that the show would go through the roof and make such waves in the reality TV world, but soon he realized that there are way more car enthusiasts that he knows of, so this was his time to shine. As more and more episodes of Fast and Loud kept coming, people were hooked. The show had everything from reckless fights to super technical and detailed work on the cars, but above all, the feeling of accomplishment whenever Rawlings sold a spin car for big bucks. That was the best feeling ever for the fans. Spinning cars was a new concept, even for the creators, and when they heard about Rawlings' father and how he's been doing it for years, they were pretty impressed. So they instantly decided to let the world know more about it and how the Gas Monkey Garage has been making waves in the industry for years without anyone even knowing. Their ultimate goal was to get a lot of views first of all, which they obviously did get, but the creators also wanted to promote the car spinning business because it's a lost art, and not a lot of people are getting into this industry, which is why it was important to highlight it. And yes, the show also had a lot of lighthearted drama, so it was pretty great for binge watching. With millions of viewers across the globe and a very consistent watch time, it seemed like Fast and Loud cracked the code to success. Although the first season of the show was pretty well received, when they introduced the thrill and drama to the fourth season, this was when they truly hit their peak. Season 4 had all the major casts and some pretty unfortunate mishaps. It was as if you're watching a ticking time bomb because they had to send as many cars to the auction as possible and also make profits. By the end of the season, Richard buys a car that's bound to make him lose a lot of money. All these incidents are what made the show interesting and got its fourth season millions of views in the US alone. The Fast and Loud cast thought that their road to success was going to be really smooth now that their careers were on a constant upward trajectory, but they never really thought that it would ever go down in the drain. However, the show went through some pretty major shockers, with the most important cast members leaving and the controversies revolving around it.
When Aaron says something out loud, it's pretty much the way it's going to be. You're not going to back him up. You're not going to change his mind, even if he's wrong. So he's serious.
After a whole bunch of controversies and repetitive storyline of the show, it felt like they were overdoing it, so ending the show obviously was inevitable. But it ended in the worst way possible. Despite all the bad publicity, Fast and Loud was still going pretty strong, and the creators could have easily made a few more seasons with consistent viewership. However, the host of the show, Rawlings, decided to leave. Without him, Fast and Loud was basically faceless, as he was the driving force behind the show since day one. Fast and Loud's cancellation was quite sudden, and no one thought that the show would end just like that. But according to recent reports, Rawlings felt like he was stuck in a rut, and his creative juices just weren't flowing. He got too comfortable in the show and lost his edge. This was a huge bummer for him because he didn't just want to stay a host forever. Rawlings had a lot of other projects lined up, and he wanted to continue working on them. For instance, his YouTube channel has over 1 million viewers, but while he was on the show, he wasn't allowed to reveal anything particular about his garage. The restrictions were also making him feel suffocated, and the worst part was, he just couldn't talk about it. Rawlings signed a contract that clearly said that if he badmouthed Discovery Channel ever, he has to pay a fine of thousands of dollars. So even when Rawlings was asked about why the show exactly ended, he kind of went off track and said that it just reached to a point where it was better to end it. Besides, reports also reveal that Rawlings was having some creative differences with the creators of the show lately, and since most of his team members left the show, he was bound to leave too. And it turned out to be a great decision for his brand because now he's focusing solely on spinning cars and on his career as a social media influencer with millions of followers. Fast and Loud wasn't free from controversies, as the show had a massive cast and not everyone got along really well. Things even got borderline messy at times, so let's get into it and find out more about the controversies that resulted in the eventual downfall of Fast and Loud.
You know what time it is?
Hell yeah, I know what time it is. I just got through watching the Flintstones.
Oh, listen, you've got a contract with this company that says you have to be here at such and such time, and you're
Smith
not.
and Butler were kind of problem employees on the show, but they knew their craft, and that's what made them stay in the spotlight for so long. However, people started noticing in the later seasons that Jordan and Smith aren't in Rawlings' garage anymore, and no one even talks about it. It seemed like they disappeared into thin air. It was later reported that Rawlings fired them, but that's not it. The real controversy started when Smith actually talked to the media and claimed that they were fired because they let a fan take pictures with the custom car in the garage. What really happened was that a fan came to the garage and he wanted to take a picture with the car. The manager refused to let them take the picture, but all the mechanics wanted to permit them because the fan was actually going through cystic fibrosis. But this reason wasn't enough to save Smith and Butler's job, and once this news got public, everyone started seeing Rawlings as the rude person who's really out of touch and doesn't even have the basic courtesy to treat his fans right. It was the time when the cancel culture was on the rise, so Rawlings was pretty much canceled for his behavior. A lot of people even stopped watching the show after seeing the true colors of Rawlings. James was a huge star in Monster Garage, and when he was featured in Fast and Loud, everyone thought that they'll get to learn from two of the biggest authorities in the spinning industry. But James being on the show turned into a huge ramble, and they beef-fed for quite a bit. It was all well and good, and people were actually enjoying this friendly fight until James did something very unexpected. Rawlings said some unpleasant things about James to a media house, but what James did was he dumped a whole truckload of horse manure to the driveway of Rawlings' garage. It was a nightmare, and the worst part is, it was all on camera. People criticized James and said that this prank was in bad taste, and this ended up ruining his reputation completely. People who used to love him were now cringing and getting embarrassed, and if this wasn't enough, James wasn't the Fast and Loud sweetheart anymore. Not everything you see on TV is true, especially if it's reality TV. Something similar happened when in the 4th season, the much hyped prototypes of Pontiac Firebirds were featured.
Probably the most significant cars I've ever done in my life. Firebirds number 1 and 2.
The show actually made everyone think that these were original prototypes that they just found in a barn, and they cost around $325,000. It might have gotten them a lot of views, but the Pontiac enthusiasts knew it was all bull. The cars they discovered weren't actually prototypes. In fact, they were workable models that were made to be sold. They looked a little different because they were probably the first few models in the pipeline, but the thing is, they just weren't prototypes. Not only this, these car models were even on eBay, and some random guy was selling them for about $30,000. This report went viral, and the fans kind of lost their trust on the show because then they didn't know what actually was the truth and what they were hiding. Rawlings was really headstrong on the show, and that's probably what made him such a great leader for the crew, but the thing is, he didn't take a lot of advice before making a decision. It has happened so many times that Rawlings picks a car for spinning, and after spending so much money and hard work into it, the car turns out to be absolute trash and rusty. This hasn't happened to Rawlings once or twice, but so many times that you would think the man will be a little cautious the next time. But Rawlings never learned from his mistake and continued spending a lot of money on cars that were almost 80% rust. It felt like he was losing his edge, and also thousands of dollars, which is probably why the creators discontinued the show. In the last seasons of Fast and Loud, Rawlings got a little too confident with his craft. He actually forgot that even the best mechanic can make mistakes. He used to haplessly swap a gazillion parts of a car with either upgraded or different parts, and it's not like that's gonna work every single time. If one part is changed, then it could result in faults in other parts too. So there were cars that Rawlings thought would be spun in a very cheap rate, but they continued to come back for more modifications because of one fault or the other. This made him lose thousands of dollars, and it started happening too often by the end of the show, which could be another reason why Rawlings thought it was a good idea to take a break. Fans weren't particularly happy when Fast and Loud dedicated a whole episode to building a replica.
But he wanted it to be original, just like the one on the show. So it took me about 2 or 3 days before I finally found one that was for sale down in San Antonio. Beep, boop, beep, 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 beep.
It was the episode build, and as soon as it aired, the fans pointed out that everything was fake and scripted. What happened was that Richard's friend requested him to build a replica car just like Knight Rider for his birthday. He also gave Rawlings a lot of money for building this car, but in the entire episode, we don't see them building anything. It seems more like Rawlings is on a tour to Europe. It felt very pushed, and fans thought that including this episode really wasn't necessary. From this point on, fans knew that the reality show wasn't being entirely realistic anymore, and it pretty much wrecked the reputation of the show. But now that after all the controversies and road bumps, Fast and Loud has ended for good. Some people are curious to know what the cast of the show's been up to now, so let's spill the tea on the cast. Rawlings has been calling all the shots on the show since day one. His business was to focus on Fast and Loud, and now that the show has ended, it has given him more time to focus on expanding his garage and spin more cars. Rawlings felt like he couldn't peak what he did at the Discovery Channel, so it was better that he finally got creative freedom and is now focusing on his YouTube channel and Instagram handle. Interestingly, Rawlings recently sold most of the cars he spun for a whole lot of money, and he's planning on using this money to spin some of the rarest cars to ever exist. This will surely get him insane profits. Aaron was the brains behind all the spin cars, as it was his craft that made everything possible. He understood the technical aspect of the job and paired really well with Rawlings. But in 2017, Kaufman suddenly left Gas Monkey Garage and everyone was shocked. He didn't even give a reason to the audiences and simply said that it was something personal. After leaving the show, he switched his focus towards his own shop in Dallas, where he restores cars from literally any generation of Ford F-100. If this job wasn't interesting enough, Kaufman was also offered his very own show by Discovery Channel. It was called Shifting Gears with Aaron Kaufman. Although the show didn't do very well and they had to discontinue it after the first season, Aaron had a hoot and a half while shooting for his very own TV show. Currently, he's focusing on his shop and is also trying to expand his business, and if Aaron gets another chance to star in his own TV show, he's surely gonna jump on the opportunity. Yulon Hyso. There was a time when Rawlings went to Hyso for literally every interior need. Although she wasn't hired by him full-time, it still felt like she was a part of the crew, and she was the best at her craft. Besides, her one-liners were witty enough to leave everyone in awe, but fans noticed that Hyso suddenly disappeared from the scene in the last few seasons, and no one really talked about it. As it turns out, Rawlings started working with someone else probably because he was getting a better price quote from them. Now, Hyso's actually doing pretty good in her career, and being on the show gave her business all the push it needed to skyrocket. She's still the upholstery queen and is building her very own empire. Christy managed all the official matters of the garage, and from tight deadlines to budget issues, she handled it all. It felt like Gas Monkey Garage would crumble without her, but then in 2016, she heard some very unfortunate news. The doctors told her that she had cancer and she needs to start the treatment immediately. Christy left the garage and went for treatment. She did everything from radiation therapy to surgery, and finally, she was cancer-free. But Christy realized that life is too short and she shouldn't spend it in stress, but in doing something that she actually enjoys. As a result, she opened her very own salon and left the hectic work of Fast and Loud. She's still running her own salon and spends most of her time with her family. Tom wasn't the ideal employee for Rawlings because he was loud and a little pretentious. He didn't even pay attention to most of Rawlings' commands, and it was a little surprise for a lot of people that he lasted for 4 seasons. At the end, Rawlings fired him for letting a fan take a picture with a really fancy car. After getting fired, Tom didn't just leave his profession because it was what he was good at. He continued to work around cars, and he still is pretty active on social media, where he often shares the updates about his life. Fast and Loud didn't just succeed, but it started a whole new chain of reality shows surrounding car modifications. Shows like Misfit Garage were a spin-off of Fast and Loud, and this particular one even garnered a lot of attention from the people. It featured all the employees that were fired from the original show, so it was interesting to see them all back together. Not all spin-offs of Fast and Loud got insanely famous, but the show did start a new trend of spinning cars. The audiences also got to know more about car spinning from the show, as before this, home spinning projects were all the rage, and a lot of TV shows were already covering them. But spinning cars was way more technical, so with Fast and Loud, people got to know about this whole other niche of spinning stuff. The impact of this show was so much that Gas Monkey Garage became one of the most famous car modification companies, and people bragged about getting their car modified from the TV stars. It was a huge phenomenon because of which Fast Loud managed to continue for almost a decade. Although people say that the show is bound to fall because of so many reasons, the thing is, it still managed to win millions of hearts.